I'm Nora Whitfield. I'm 44. My father has never once wished me happy birthday without being reminded by someone else in the family first. So when my son got offered a research post in Norway that he'd spent 2 years earning, and my father suddenly needed him to stay home instead, I already knew something was off before I even heard the reason. He didn't ask my son, he told my sister. And my sister called me 40 minutes later, and the only word I could understand through the crying was storage unit. I'll get to the storage unit. I'll get to the voicemail my father accidentally left running for 6 full minutes while he thought he'd hung up. But first you need to understand why nobody in my family has said the word no to him in over a decade. Because once you understand that, you'll understand exactly why what my son did broke something that had been locked shut since before he was born. If you've ever been the responsible one who ends up paying for everyone else's peace, stay for this one. It doesn't end where you think. Here's the shape of my family, quickly, because it matters. My father, Walter, is 71. He ran a hardware supply company for 30 years, and he is, without exaggeration, the most persuasive man I have ever met. Not loud, persuasive. He can make you feel like refusing him is a character flaw you didn't know you had. My mother died 9 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to funeral. And somewhere in the middle of that grief, my father discovered something about himself. Crisis made people show up. Calm didn't, so the crises never really stopped. I'm an accountant. I audit things for a living. I look at numbers that don't add up and I find out why. It took me embarrassingly long to turn that instinct on my own father, because auditing your dad feels like a betrayal even when he's the one cooking the books. My son Caleb is 17. Since he was 15, he's worked summers on a research trawler out of a marine station, and this spring the station offered him a paid post in Norway for the fall. 6 months, studying cold water fisheries, the kind of thing that turns into a career before most kids have picked a major. He'd applied for it himself, interviewed for it himself. He didn't tell anyone until he got the acceptance email, because that's who he is. He doesn't want help until the thing is already real. My father found out about Norway on a Tuesday. By Thursday, he'd decided Caleb wasn't going. The reason he gave was my sister Priya. She's 40, going through a divorce, and she'd just signed a lease on a smaller apartment, which meant clearing out the old house in 3 weeks before the sale closed. Walter told her, without asking Caleb first, that Caleb would spend his last month before Norway helping her pack, sort, and haul everything into storage. Family steps up, he said. He can go chase fish later. Caleb didn't hear about this plan from his grandfather. He heard about it from me, standing in our kitchen, because Priya had already told Walter she was grateful, and so relieved. She thought Caleb had offered. He hadn't offered anything. He was standing 3 feet away when I found out, in his work boots, still smelling like diesel from the boat. He didn't raise his voice. He picked up my phone, called his grandfather, and said 4 sentences. "Hey, Grandpa, it's Caleb. I heard about the packing. I already leave for Norway in 5 weeks, and I can't move that up. I can help Aunt Priya any weekend before I go, but I can't give her the whole month." Silence. Then Walter said, "Pleasant as church. I see. I hope the fish are worth it, Caleb," and hung up. I'd never heard my father not argue. In 44 years, I had never once heard Walter Whitfield lose an argument by simply ending it. That's when I knew this wasn't over. That was the opening move. 2 days later, my Aunt Denise called me, the sister my father talks to when he wants a message delivered without his fingerprints on it. "It's a shame," she said, "that a boy would pick fish over his own aunt when she's losing everything." By the weekend, 3 cousins had texted me variations of the same sentence, word for word, like they'd been handed a script. Because they had. But here's the detail that kept me up that week. Through all of it, Priya never called me. Not once. In my family, silence isn't peace. Silence means someone is being aimed like a weapon, and you don't know at what yet. She finally called on a Sunday night, and she skipped hello. Why would Caleb offer to help for a month and then back out? She said. Dad told me weeks ago he wanted to do it. I turned down a mover I could have paid for because I thought it was handled. I went very still. Caleb had learned about this plan in my kitchen, in real time, the same day I did. There was no version where he'd offered anything weeks earlier. Priya, I said slowly, walk me through exactly what Dad told you, word for word. The line went quiet except for a television somewhere behind her. When she spoke again, her voice had cracked open. He said Caleb heard I was struggling and offered on his own. He was so proud of him. A pause. Nora, he didn't offer, did he? No, I said. He found out the same minute I did. And that's when my sister said the sentence that turned this from a family disagreement into something I couldn't unknow. Then why? She said. Did Dad tell the storage facility to cancel my reservation in March? I paid a deposit for a unit in April. When I called to confirm this week, they said the request to cancel came from the account holder, and the account holder is him. He co-signed the lease with me after the divorce. He's on the account. My father had canceled my sister's storage unit 2 months before he needed a crisis to hand my son, before Norway was even offered. I didn't say the thought sitting under my ribs. It was too big, and I had no proof yet, just a canceled reservation and a very bad feeling. That feeling got worse a week later, when Caleb came home from the Marine station and said, quiet, the way he says things he's been sitting on. Mom, has Grandpa ever had an emergency that turned out to be nothing? He slid his phone across the counter. He'd started a note 4 years ago, back when he was 13. A running log, dates and details, of every crisis our family had dropped everything for. 16 entries. Next to more than half of them, a small note in his own handwriting. No ambulance came. No receipt. No proof. I read it twice. My son had been quietly keeping better records on my own father than I had, for 4 years, because he'd needed to know if it was just him. I stopped wondering if it was me, he said. I just needed to know if it was real. 3 days before Caleb's send-off dinner, my father called me with an offer he never called an offer. I've spoken to Pastor Green, he opened, which is how you know the calls have already gone out ahead of him. Everyone agrees this has gone on long enough. Tell that boy to do the right thing, or don't bother inviting me Saturday. Attendance at his own grandson's send-off, held out like a hostage negotiation. I said, Dad, when's the last time you missed something on your own terms, instead of using it as leverage? He hung up on me. My hands shook for an hour, which is a strange thing to admit at 44, and also the truest thing I can tell you. He went around me anyway. That night, Caleb's phone lit up with a message from his grandfather. Long, built like a courtroom closing argument, his dead grandmother in it, Priya's divorce in it, and ending the way everything in our family ends, after everything this family has done for you. Caleb read it standing at the counter. Then he did something I didn't expect. He didn't answer with words. He opened a saved voicemail from 3 weeks earlier, one he'd never played for me, and forwarded the audio file straight back to his grandfather with no caption at all. I didn't know what was on it. Neither did my father, apparently, until he listened. Here's what happened. 20 minutes later. My phone rang once and cut off. My father, hanging up before I could answer, which had never happened once in 44 years. Then Priya called, crying in a way I hadn't heard since our mother's funeral. The voicemail, she kept saying. He left the whole thing running. 3 weeks earlier, my father had called Caleb to lean on him about Norway, and after Caleb didn't pick up, Walter had left a voicemail, said his piece, And then, thinking he'd hung up, kept talking to himself in the car for 6 more minutes while the recording ran. Caleb had listened to the whole thing back in April and said nothing because, his words later, I figured I could just leave for Norway and let it stay buried. I want to read you the part that mattered, the part he'd said out loud to an empty car, believing no one would ever hear it. Priya's about to lose that storage unit, and good, she'll panic, and then I hand her the boy, and this family remembers who holds it together. They only show up when something's broken. He'd said it to himself, out loud, recorded on his own grandson's dead phone call. My father had engineered my sister's crisis in March to spend it in June. And a boy who was 17, who kept his own written records because nobody else would, had proof of it sitting quietly in his pocket for 3 weeks, and chose to forward it only once his grandfather tried to hold his own send-off dinner hostage. Priya and I stayed on the phone for 2 hours that night, the longest we'd talked in years, and we did the thing you do after a diagnosis. We went back through everything. The pipe that flooded the year I turned 30, with no plumber's invoice. The roof repair that needed cash, no receipts, the year after Mom died. Some of it was real. My mother's death was real. His grief was real. I'd stake anything on that. He mixed truth into the lie the way you cut something to make it stretch, and that's exactly why none of us tasted it for years. Saturday, the send-off dinner. Backyard, string lights, Caleb's duffel already packed by the door with his visa paperwork taped to the front pocket like a passport he could touch. Priya came early to help set up. No switchboard between us for the first time in a decade. My father arrived 40 minutes in his good jacket, carrying a wrapped box the size of a toolbox, working the yard like a man running for office. Compliments for the neighbors, a story about my mother for the older guests. Then, before the food was even served, the sound I'd been waiting for since the driveway, a spoon against a glass. To my grandson, he began, glass raised, voice warm as a hymn, who's leaving his whole family behind to go chase fish in the snow. A pause built for laughter. Half the yard laughed. The half that didn't know. Later, Caleb opened the box. Inside, a framed photograph of Walter holding him as a newborn, engraved at the bottom, "Don't forget who was there first." Caleb read it, looked up, found his grandfather's eyes across the yard, and said, evenly, "Thanks, Grandpa." Mom was in the room, too. I caught my father's elbow gently and walked him behind the fence line, out of the string lights. And there, with no audience left to perform for, the voice changed entirely. "One phone call," he said. "Tell those research people he's needed at home. Or you can explain to everyone why I wasn't at his going away." I let the sentence sit in the air and didn't pick it up. "You'll still be his grandfather tomorrow," I said. "And tomorrow, he'll still be on a plane. Both of those are true at the same time now, Dad. That's the new arrangement." He stared at me like I'd stopped speaking English, then rebuilt his face and walked back toward the lights. I thought that was the end of it. I'd forgotten my father never leaves a stage without one more act. 4 minutes later, as Mark carried the cake out, my father gripped the edge of the table, gray-faced, one hand climbing to his chest. "Something's wrong," he said, and dropped into the nearest chair. 40 people turned, in the same half-second, toward me. The accountant, the daughter, the one who'd know what to do. I knelt in front of him, 2 fingers to his wrist, eyes on my watch, the way I've learned to read a ledger for what doesn't add up. Pulse. Steady, unhurried, nothing like fear. "Where's the pain, Dad?" Point with one finger. His hand drifted to his left side, held a beat too long, then corrected right when my face didn't change. Real pain doesn't check its audience for a reaction. I've seen that look on a spreadsheet before I ever saw it on a face, a number that's been adjusted to fit the story it needs to tell. I leaned in close enough that only he could hear me over the candles. Here's what happens now. I'll drive you to the hospital myself, tonight, and I'll stay until the tests come back. And when they're clean, we're done with this. Sunday dinners, planned visits, real help whenever you actually need it. But I will never again answer a performance dressed as an emergency. So tell me the truth, right now, and whatever you say, I will believe you in front of everyone here. Is this real? The lights ticked in the silence, and down at the bottom of his eyes, under all of it, I saw something flicker I choose to believe was recognition. He patted my hand, stood, smoothed his jacket, and announced to the yard, "I'm fine, don't fuss." He picked up his coat and left through the gate, past the cake, past 40 guests who'd gone quiet. Nobody ran after him. For the first time in our family's history, nobody ran after him. At 5 the next morning, Caleb's duffel went into the trunk, visa paperwork taped where he could see it. At the door he stopped and asked me, the way he asks everyone else if they're okay before himself. If he never really comes around, "You good with that?" I told him the truest thing I had. I'm okay being your mother first, and his daughter second. I should have picked that order a long time ago. He grinned. My father's exact grin, somehow, handed down through all of it anyway, and the car pulled away. My father went quiet for 7 weeks. No calls, no crises, no cousins relaying messages. Then, on a Thursday, he called and asked, in an ordinary voice, if Sunday dinner was still open. He came at 6. Brought store-bought rolls, a small thing, but my father has never in his life shown up to anything without controlling every detail of it, and store rolls were the closest thing to surrender his hands could manage. He reached for the old line once, when the food came out, after everything this family, and then just stopped, mid-sentence, because nobody at the table picked it up. It sat there. He looked at it, and passed the potatoes instead. He hasn't transformed. I don't believe people do, not really, and I won't sell you that ending. But the sirens stopped, I think, because sirens only work on people who still come running, and none of us run anymore. We just show up, on schedule, every Sunday, whether it's convenient for a crisis or not. Caleb calls from Norway most weeks. He told me the cold water research is harder than he expected, and better than he hoped. He also told me something else, almost as an afterthought. He finally deleted that 4-year list of dates and proof. Said he didn't need to keep the evidence anymore, because he wasn't waiting to find out if it was real. He already knew. If someone in your life has only ever shown up for you when something was on fire, ask yourself the question, it took me 44 years to ask my own father, is this an emergency, or is it just the only way they know how to be loved? You don't owe anyone a lifetime of sirens to prove you'll come. You just have to show up on Sundays.